So welcome back, people. We're going to finish our CSS series. We're not talking about CSX Corporation, which is the railroad. We're talking about cascading style sheets. Specifically this time, the use of CSS for layout and positioning. I'm going to do a preliminary one that's kind of old school now, and then we're going to have two videos that are, well, down and dirty, easy and simple. I have in the list on Canvas a couple of older PowerPoints that present the ideas we use in CSS for this particular page that we're going to build tonight in a different way. One of which is old school, but it concerns basically building something like the Edgar Allan Poe pages. We use My Antonia as the start of that. And then there's another one that I've got that builds a slightly more modern web page, but it also talks about the way you can use the 4 different types of flow in your CSS. So we can take things out of our regular page flow and put them where we want them and have them stick using absolute, for example. But it's in that slide set, so you guys can go take a look at those via Canvas. So the first thing I want to do is I want to touch base on a little bit of old school stuff that I said. So let's share my screen here. And I have got, this is my summer 20 with the HTML code that I've got here. That's interesting. Why is that not in the right color? That's even more interesting. Oh, there we go. It must have been a glitch. So that's okay. We've got those all the time, especially when I'm working from home on my office laptop or desktop, rather. This is the code that we're going to talk about in the layout part of this next short lecture. It's a header, which says this is a header. There's a section ID for main content, a second section ID of column 2, and then a footer, which basically just says the copyright symbol. Remember, the HTML5 entity for copyright is the ampersand, the word copy, and a semicolon, just like the way the ampersand is ampersand AMP in a semicolon. We've got our validator badges on there, and you should be able to see the way to use those tonight. Again, it's not the best way we can do it right now, but it's the best way we can do it underneath the rules that have been set up for us by UNL. So we just have to live with those. But at least it should help some of you with figuring out where your problems are on your page. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some old school stuff that used to be very, very widely used in order to let older browsers play well with CSS. Internet Explorer before IE9 or IE10, somewhere in there, used to be really notorious for doing their own thing and not following the standards. So we're going to talk about ways to make those particular browsers, the older browsers, do what we want them to do in the right way. And we don't have to do all of this. We're going to fly through it a little bit because it's been posted for ages and ages, and you can take a look at things on your own. I am not going to require the majority of this, but I want to talk about it in case you get out in the real world and you're doing some web programming or web development and your boss or your company wants you to do it that way. So, I kept hitting F5 and it didn't listen to me. So what we're going to talk about today is normalization CSS, the HTML5 shiv, and we're going to talk about using external style sheets to have multiple rules on a single page. Now, I know you've already gotten started on that with assignment 7. That's quite all right. I gave you some extra information there that you could have used to have completed that assignment. And with the video on utilizing the W3 School validator for both HTML and CSS3, you've got a way to check that out and make sure that any errors you've got, you can basically track them down and squish them. So basically what this tells you is that it used to be the wild, wild west out there. Every browser had its own set of standard tags. And a lot of times you would go to a website and you would see a little badge that said, this page best viewed by Internet Explorer 6 or Firefox or Mozilla or something along those lines. We don't need to do that anymore, and it's thanks to the W3 schools. So basically, there are 3 main ways we can figure out how to place stuff on our screen. We can do fixed layouts, which is like the Edgar Allan Poe pages. Pixel-based measurements, we do it exactly to a certain amount of space, no more, no less. The problem with that can be that if your user has a very, very large or a very, very small browser window, they may not be able to see all of your page at the same time. Fluid layouts, liquid layouts, some people call them, are percentage-based. So the picture that takes up 25% of your screen or the column that takes up 50% of your screen always takes up 50% of the screen until your site is too small in their screen to have anything but everything overlapping. Finally, there's a type of layout that uses the M. Remember, that's the width of the capital M in a particular font. Basically, that is called an elastic layout because what it does is it allows the entire page to base the scale of the page on the user's font. So, you know, I'm kind of an old guy. I have to sometimes increase the size of my font in order to read things. That's kind of what the elastic layout is all about. It bases everything on that page on how big the user's font size is, or what the user's font size is. My English teachers are rolling over their graves right now. That's okay. Again, some of the earlier Internet Explorer browsers were just awful with rendering CSS. That basically has gone away with Internet Explorer 10, 11, 12, whatever we're on right now, and Edge. They're still bombarding me with ads for Edge, but I don't know if I'll ever use it or not. I may test it a while, but not in the summer. Basically, when you're building your website, and we've talked about this before, you should make it into, you know, a logical structure. Header information at the top, the body, top to bottom, we read left to right, and your story, your information should make logical sense, whether we have the CSS on or not. And then at the very end of your page, that's where your footer information should go. Usually it's something like your company name and a copyright symbol or something along those lines. What else? So this shouldn't be rocket science. It can be difficult when you're new to just make sure that it's flowing in the direction that you want. But CSS is the way we're going to move stuff around, not by putting weird positions for the paragraphs in our story. When I pick up a new paperback book, I always read the last couple pages anymore, because if it's a bummer, I don't want to take the time to read it. if everybody dies in the end, that's not a book for me anymore. But some people don't like that. So you wouldn't put, you know, the denouement right in the front of the book. You always build up to the denouement, and then you go down to the end of the story. Now, IE 8 and below, again, I would say sometimes Internet Explorer 9 doesn't recognize everything. But a lot of companies used to use what they call a shiv. Specifically, the one that's out there that is free to use from Google is called the HTML5 shiv. And what we use there is a conditional comment tag. Now, a conditional comment you may have seen on the source code for other websites, because it allows the browser to take a look at the code and include something else if it matches a specific set of conditions. So what I want to do here is go back to this, and what I'm talking about here, and I'm sorry it's kind of dark, but the conditional comment is right here. I don't know if that's easier to read or not, but anyway, this style section color, don't worry about that. We're not going to do that one because it doesn't really work anymore. But right here, the conditional comment starts out as a regular HTML5 comment, and then it's got a pair of square brackets. And in this case, it says if LT capital IE9, and it closes with a greater than bracket. We give a script source out onto the web to find in the Google Code repository, the HTML5 shiv, and then we close our script. We end the conditional comment with that last highlighted bit that is the greater than, a bang, the square brackets, and the word end if, ENDIF, one word, no spaces. And then we have our regular HTML5 -- greater than to close our HTML5 comment. Now, the only time this script source is called is when the browser detected is Internet 6, 7, 8, or 9. Any other time, it will ignore it and go on with its happy, happy life. So that's really all there is to it. And we don't really need to talk anymore about it because your boss, your company, if you work in web design, is going to give you the information that they want you to include in your header. The head tags, I mean, not the header that says this is the XYZ widget company on the top of your visual web page. So let's go back here. Again, the only reason we use the shiv is to catch browsers that don't follow the W3 school rules. And those are getting very, very small these days. As a matter of fact, Internet Explorer 6, even the Microsoft employees had a funeral for Internet Explorer 6 when they deprecated it. So you shouldn't find any IE6 stuff allowed in the world these days, but there are throwbacks that stick with the same software forever. So again, we're going to skip this because even with, well, I don't have Internet Explorer on this machine, so I can't show you the differences here. But if you use the shiv, what will happen is that this color orange, and I think there's another one I've got on another slide, but that won't show up unless you have the HTML5 shiv there. Now that's, again, on Internet Explorer 6, 7, 8, and maybe 9. So it is not a huge problem anymore, but it is still out there, so you might as well know about it. Let's go on to the next one then. Now, the other thing that we probably want to do is normalize our styles. What I mean by that is every browser is kind of a little bit different even to this day. So what we do is we use what's called a normalized CSS. And there's two of them that are basically used. The Meyer reset and the Gallagher-Neal normalize. I generally use the normalize if I have to. Personally, I think I check it on enough browsers that I really don't add this to many websites unless the customer asks me to. So there's a really cool way, by the way, that you can pick one of these things up. And that is in CSS called the curl command. So I want to go back into, I've got two windows in Putty open, by the way. One is to my CSS files. The other is to the HTML5 files. So what we're going to do here is I've already made the CSS directory. Oh, come on, you silly thing. So all I'm going to do is get out of full screen mode. That's why I wasn't doing it. And copy. Now, I don't know if this is going to work today, but we'll try. There we go. The curl command allows us to go out to the repository where the normalized file resides and bring it back and dump it into the directory that we issued the curl command from. And if we ls-l here, there we go. July 16th at 2:49 p.m. normalized.csx, or CSS rather, was put on my hard drive. And it'll work for yours too. Now, the way we use that is we go up into our head, and I usually keep this one right after the shiv if that's being used. And you'll notice all we do is link to it the same way we would with a link tag to our own CSS. In fact, remember that an external CSS loses out to an embedded CSS, and embedded CSS loses out to an inline CSS. But that cascade also works in your head. So we put the normalized CSS first, and then we put our own CSS last. We make it closest to the stuff it's going to style. So that if we overwrite something that's in the normalize, that's perfectly fine. We will have, if the normalize says everybody's supposed to have orange text, and that's a bad example, I understand, but it's just, you know, something out of the blue. But we say no, orange text is bad. So all of our text by default is going to be black. Our own CSS then overrides the orange text from normalize. If there is a place where normalize says all our text is going to be orange and Times New Roman, we can say, okay, I'm fine with the Times New Roman, but my text isn't going to be orange. And all you have to do that is write the rules that you want on your page. So what'll happen then is the normalize and your own CSS will create kind of a super rule so that you override the orange text, but you accept the Times New Roman font family. Hopefully that makes sense. It's really not as difficult as it seems. Basically, you put that your own external CSS as the very last thing before you exit the head. So that makes it the most important CSS in terms of external pages that you're bringing in. Sometimes you can find websites that have, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 different CSS external sheets based on the type of page or that they're going to cover. So it's kind of interesting when you do it, but remember that it is that same cascade. The stuff that you want most should be the last in your head. That sounds kind of weird, but yeah, basically what it is. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay, so we did that. We talked about the shiv, we talked about normalizing. That's basically what I just showed you. What we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at what these things do by adding them to our CSS one at a time. And it's kind of icky, but it makes a point. So let's go out here and 8.5. So as we stand, let me open up the CSS files again here. So myo.css. Our body background color is like a sky blue. And that's not too bad. Remember that the CSS comment tags is the / and the star to open it up, and it's a * / down here to back it up. So I still want to be here. Oh, I forgot to hit the insert key. So / star closes that off. I'm going to go up here though and open up the sections. So let's see what that does for us. I'm going to save this. :W again. We'll go out here and hit the refresh button. There's our two different sections, the main content, or the main column, and the secondary column. Our header and our footer haven't been styled yet. So let's go back out here once again and let's move that comment. Come on, you silly thing. I'm typing on a very small laptop at the moment, and it's just not fit for my hands, basically. Insert. So let's save it. And come out here and press refresh. Now, our main content changes to pretty awful. Blue color for the main column with a background color of lime. And that's probably not something you should emulate. Finally, we're going to highlight the footer. Well, that's interesting. Oh, I'm in visual mode. That would explain that. We're going to come down here and get rid of this too. Escape, :W, and bam. So all we did in that is we made it, go away. We made it a 50% size font. We changed it to Courier New or monospace, and we colored it black. And that is why this is only 8.5. So let's take just a minute here. We're going to kill that. And we've got this already set up. So this should go really nice and easy. Remember that when you're on one of these pages, you can right click and view the page source. There's the normalized CSS. There's the CSS for this page. We're going to talk about background images today as well. Pardon me. And well, let's just see what happens. Now, what you can do is you can take any of these, right click, view the page source, and you can see how these things were done. So we've got a div ID equals content, and if you look up the CSS, where do we go here? Can't remember if it's lecture 2 or test 2. It is lecture 2. Oh no, it's test 2. Oops. So let's back it up. Come back here and do test 2. I was not very creative that day when I named things. So right here is a div pound content. Let's make this big enough to see. Div pound content says whenever you've got a div and the ID is content, this is what I want you to do. And what I want you to do is take a width of 80%. So 80% of the screen is the content ID. Margin left and margin bottom at 9%. Padding of 20 pixels, height of 100%. And background dash image has one attribute, and that is the URL. Now remember that we're in a CSS directory. So in order to get into our images directory where we store all of our images, we have to use the cd ... trick, which means we go from the image or the CSS directory down to our assignment directory, our page directory, and then we go back up into images and we find, I think that's blue leather or something. I can't remember what the BSG stands for, but that is, oh, it's the lace. That's the lace. So you can figure out how these work. Just go in and play with them. Play with the content. See what you can do. I don't care how busy this background color is, as long as I'm not setting text directly on it. I don't know, it looks like it's watermarked from somebody. I couldn't see that before. I picked it off of a site that said it was free for use for nonprofits. And I just saw that today. Anyway, so let's get the slides out, or the slide set out. Let's open it up and let's follow through each one of these. Now there are 2 slide sets that we're going to make it through here before we have to process this. Slide 14 and 15. 16 and 17, I believe, are still on Canvas, but those are not part of, well, they're in the 16 and 17 slot, but they're really old school stuff. One is kind of a detailed discussion of layout, more depth than we've got here. And another one is the old school way to make a fixed pixel layout, like the Edgar Allan Poe pages. So you can take a look at those if you want to, play around with it, see what you can do to change the code, and have fun with it. All right, so this is where we're at. This is 14, slide 01. And let's open up our slide set here. There we go. I forgot I had to hit a function key. That's what my problem was. So this is called the box model of CSS. And it's a great test question, because this is the way we kind of think about each element in a web page. So in the center of it is content, the things that we want to present to the users that hit our page. That's surrounded by padding, the kind of like, you know, the white foam or the little foam beads that, or the giant air bubble poppers that go around something in a box that is considered fragile. It pushes the content away from the edges of the box. Now, after content and padding comes the border. It's the third item. And the border you could think of as the walls of the box, right? It's that outline around each one of the cells in our table. And finally, the last part of the box model is the margin. And what the margin does is it pushes other things away from this particular box. So what you're doing basically is you're juggling different content boxes. But remember that it's always content, padding, border, and margin for the box model of CSS. And if you take a look at at least one of those old videos that I left up on Canvas for you to play around with on your own, you'll see that it starts out as well with the box model. Notice also that we can take a look at the top, the right, the bottom, or the left of our box. If you set things individually, that would be always done from the top clockwise. So it would be top, right, bottom, left. The acronym for that is TROUBLE. You can stay out of trouble if you remember TRBL. So again, inside of this, each one of these entities can be done individually, can be done as an entire entity. You just put one number down and padding's going to be 5 pixels for all 4 sides. Or you can individually address them as top right, bottom left. And there's a couple other ways too, but we'll talk about those when we get there. By default, remember, default page is top down, and we read it from right to left. Now, there are 4 ways we can position an element on the page. Static, which is just basically the way we put stuff on the screen and it flows, you know, like Newton's apple from the top to the bottom. Absolute says we're going to put this where we want it, and that's all there is. Fixed is a coordinate positioning system. It's like the Edgar Allan Poe pages again. That left hand with the menu in it and the picture of Poe and everything else is exactly 158 pixels from the left side of the screen. And then it has a 2-pixel end border, right-hand border, between it and the content on the right-hand side of the screen. But again, this is all done via pixels. So there can be a time when perhaps somebody's looking at the page with more than 640 pixels or something along those lines. Finally, there's relative. And relative moves the element in relation to its position in the normal flow of the page. What I would do is I would go ahead and look at those other 2 slide sets that I've got out there, because those explain absolute and relative a lot better. So we're going to go on with this for now. Here's our page, and you've already seen that. It's the same one we were using for the last set of slides, slide set 13. This is 14 though, so instead of having to rewrite the CSS file each time, retype it from layout to bi.cs, et cetera, like I did on section 12, we're going to use that menu of different pages with a reference to a different CSS file. So this was the CSS for that first one that we saw, right? It was the one, come on, I hit the enter key, or the A. Oh, that's why. So let's go here for just a minute. There we go. No CSS means we've got black text on a white screen. That's it. That is literally all she wrote. But if we move on, then something kind of amazing happens. And you've already seen that in your own homework. So let's take a look at using a background image. And the background dash image property, as I said before, requires one value, or which is the URL. And it's got to have the parentheses in it. So the URL, if you're, again, if you've got your images in an image directory and you're in a CSS directory, you've got to do .. That takes you down to where the HTML page is. You need to go up one into the images directory, and then you need to find the image that's in the images directory. So again, we're not changing at all the HTML5 page. What we are doing though is providing an image from our images directory called back.jpg. And if I remember right, this is a weird looking background, but Let's go see what we got. Yeah. If I remember correctly, I believe this is a blue leather swatch that someone photographed. It's okay, but you can see that there are some issues. You can basically see where it stops, right? Because the pattern doesn't exactly match. It's kind of like when my parents tried to do the wallpaper in the bathroom on their own and just got annoyed as hell because they couldn't quite get the wallpaper to match the seams 100%. That was years and years ago. Some of you probably weren't even born when I'm remembering that. Now, remember that we can always come back, view page source, and take a look at what the page, the page looks like. But we can also click on CSS layout-br, and you will see that our background image is images, in this case, blueleather.gif. I changed it from the one that was in the slides. And it's got a background dash repeat rule. And it says repeat X. Now, if any of you remember your algebra classes and your graphing, think about the Cartesian coordinate plane for a minute. What's the horizontal axis on the Cartesian coordinate plane? It's X. So if I were to do something instead of repeat X, I placed it as repeat dash Y, what do you think would happen? Hopefully, you would have said it moves vertically. So what I want to do, this was what, layout BI again? Layout BR. So let's go look at layout BR here. So write and quit anytime now. Let's try a duplicate session. At this point is probably great. I'm not going to be able to show you that one right now. Let's go back and see if we've got any action on Odin from the face of it. Okay. We're going to just go ahead with the lecture. I won't be able to show you the code unless for some reason this stuff is still working. That's working. Why the devil? Oh, because this one hasn't crashed out yet. So let's go into CSS, and I want a Vim layout the dash BR. So there is our background image. Our URL is drop down a directory, go up to images, grab blueleather.gif. Repeat X. Well, let's hit the insert key here, go down, and let's repeat Y instead. All right. And I'm going to hit this and go back to, I think this was 10. No, I can't remember. So now you see how big the image is for one, but you also see that it's doing a vertical instead of a horizontal. So if you want to do a vertical placement of a background image, you can go ahead and do layout -Y. If you don't put anything in there, it will do what the sample page here does, and it will tile it across the entire background. So again, pretty cool. Let's go back and keep going on this as long as I can maintain my connection to the web. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. That one is not what I wanted either, for that matter. Oh, yes, it is. There we go. So background repeat, again, is what we've been talking about. So you can repeat horizontally with the value X, vertically with the value Y. Just repeat all by itself, tiles it across the entire screen. Background repeat none doesn't show it at all. This is the next one. Let's go ahead and take a look at the screen again. This is the one where we've got it on top. We're repeating it horizontally across the top of the body itself. And let's go back here and look at, I believe that's 13 now. Yeah, there it goes across the top. Now, what we've done in terms of HTML is it's just the headers moved up into that section. So it's not a big deal. Now, let's get rid of that. Let's go back to the slides. Excuse me. Now, we've used height and width since the first real assignment, since About Me, right? That allows us not just to do that for an image file, for example, but it also allows us to specify the height and width of any element that we've got on the screen. You saw that in the third assignment, where we specified that the width of our div was going to be limited to 650 pixels wide. The max height and the min height, you can use those if you want to. The min height is especially dangerous because a lot of people are accessing the web on small screens. As probably 2/3 of you have a phone sitting right next to you, and you know, like I do. The problem is if you set a minimum height and width that's too high, and you don't have a specific different CSS for mobile devices, you may wind up having a website that's just unviewable by people on their cell phones. One of the most frustrating things that I find is once in a while I like to try a new restaurant. Obviously not during the COVID-19 apocalypse, but you know, if I get to a decent restaurant, I'm out before I go in just to find out what they're offering as far as meals. I'm a vegetarian, I don't eat meat. So I want to make sure there's something I can eat on their menu before I walk in the door. Many restaurants have the min height, min width problem, but even more have PDF documents for their menus instead of just putting it online with HTML5. It's easier for them, but I don't know about you guys, but my phone, my plan actually says, no, we're not going to download this PDF until you get somewhere that's got Wi-Fi. Now, max height and max width are not necessarily bad, but you know, I've got an artist friend that has a monitor that is probably bigger than my television set because I don't use TV very often. If I set the max height and max width to the size of his, whatever, 54-inch screen, my content, which looked great at 1024 by 768 as my set size, may look really, really weak sauce, really sparse with a max height that is, you know, set up for that big, huge screen. So personally, I just go with height and width and let it stay. Now, the cool thing is you can set it as a specific length with pixels. You can do the elastic layout with M's, or you can do a percentage, which will say, you know, like I want column 1 to be 50% of the screen, column 2 to be 25% of the screen, and split the other 12.5 on either side of column 1 and column 2. But if you do the percentages, no matter how big or how small your screen gets, until the point where everything overlaps each other at least, is stretching everything out so that it fills the screen. And again, that could mean some sparsity there, but I don't know. Basically, height and width to me are okay. Just by themselves, that is. So here's what we're going to do next. We're going to do the background URL thing. Repeat X means it's horizontal across the top. Width is 85% of the browser, and max width is up to 800 pixels. I don't know how big my screen is or your screen is, but you can see what that does. Our height for our header is 75 pixels, so it matches the height of the background image. Pound main is 68% of the screen. Pound column 2 is 28% of the screen, which means our first column is going to take up not quite 3/4 of the screen, and our column 2 is going to take up a little more than 1/4 of the screen. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at that. And that's 14, so it's 16 actually. Yeah, there we go. So this is a header. We increased the size of it with an H1. Main stuff, that's the text that's in our main column. And if you kind of guess at things, the distance between this and the left-hand side are probably about that 68-28 that we've got in the code. Down below both columns, you see we've got the footer still. Okay, and again, this is limiting it to about 800 pixels. So this may appear small if you're one of those folks that have the big monitors. Let's go back to our slide set and make it big enough to see, right? There we go. So again, we're talking about margin. Margin is the space between two boxes. And we can use margin all by itself. We can use top, bottom, top right, bottom left. Even I screwed it up there. Top right, bottom left. Stay out of trouble with that acronym. The margin can be specified in pixels or ems or a percentage. There's also one that is auto. And basically what auto will do is if you do margin left auto, margin right auto, it tends to kind of butt heads with each other and put something in the center of the screen. Doesn't always work with every browser that's out there, but it works for most. Now, whoops, I wanted to turn that down a little bit, not go all the way away from it. There we go. So what you see down there under methods, the bottom one specifies a value for all four sides, clockwise from the top, top right, bottom left. But if you know how to do it, you can set it for all four sides at once. You just put the value there, 45 pixels. Value 1 and value 2 says the first number is top and bottom. The second number is right and left. 3 numbers is top, right and left, and then bottom. And then, of course, we already talked about top, right, bottom, left. So what we're doing here is same HTML. Our body is going to have a margin of 10 pixels. We want to move it away from the top and the left edge. Our header is now background, the URL, repeat X. We've seen that before. Our font for our header is going to be italicized, 2.5 ems in height, Times New Roman or serif, and text align is center. We're going to use that text dash align to place the header right in the middle. I think that was the one we just saw, but we'll go back and take a look at it. Our main column again is 68. Our column 2 is 28, but notice line 18. We set the left margin for column 2 at 72%. So if what's happening there basically is we're going to have some kind of a border in between column 1 and column 2, which means that we're going to have 4 pixels worth of space between where main ends at 68% and column 2 begins at 72%. 72 and 28, by the way, is 100%, right? It's just the left edge of column 2 is going to start at 72% of the screen when that much from the left side is gone. Do you have anything else? We'll come back to padding here in a minute. And that was 16 that we looked at. So there's our header. Again, main stuff, second column, and looker footer. The problem is that the incremental changes on these are very, very close. The difference between the last time that I talked about it and this time is this stuff is still in one column. We haven't made those changes to take it to where the columns are side by side. Now, we haven't matched the tops yet, but we'll get there. So let's get rid of this. The next one is going to be 22. There we go. So again, padding pushes our content away from the border walls. And once again, you can set a single number that sets it for all 4 sides. 2 numbers is top and bottom on the left, left and right on the right. 3 numbers, top, left, right, and bottom. And then TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. If you can't remember how to do one of the other 3, you can't go wrong with setting padding in top, right, bottom, left. Again, same code. We're not going to talk about anything in there that's changed because it hasn't. But we are going to go down to our main column. We're going to put a padding top of 10 pixels. We're moving our main column down by 10 pixels. Column 2, we're doing the same thing. We're moving the top of our text down by 10 pixels. So we're starting to make the transition to where we're evening everything out. And what that's going to show us is this one, I believe. Well, there's our 10 pixels. I forgot I had the image in this one. But again, what we're doing with that is we're pushing stuff down away from the one above it, the header above it. So let's go there, and 22 is the last one that we're going to do. So let's go back here and take a look at the slide quickly. So we want to shift and FN and F5. There we go. And now we're going to use the float. Now remember, we've already used float on our image, right? We did float left, and our image hung to the left while the text curved around it. So we're going to use float to make column 2 and column 1 pop up so that they're at the same level. Now, if you got in there with a micrometer, it might be, a pixel or 2 off, but the human eye won't perceive that as being an error. Again, there's no change to the HTML, but what we are going to do here with the pound main, just like we did with the text around our image, we're going to float that left. Now, we're going to create an ID called pound pic. And any picture that we've got, we're going to float it to the left. We're going to have a right-hand padding of 10 pixels. So we're pushing the text that is next to the picture away by 10 pixels. And then we've got dot first P. So dot is a class. So we can use this over and over again. And what we're going to do here is we're declaring margin top at 0 pixels. So what we're going to do is moving our columns up just a little bit. Is that the last one? That is the last one. So let's go take a look at it. There we go. Now we've got our 2 columns at the same level. Second column is floating up around main stuff. But remember, look of footer is still underneath the second column, which means it's not floating to the left. It's down there on the bottom. And since we've got a situation where main stuff is floating everything to the left, that means that after second column, which doesn't, you're going to have the footer down there. Now we're going to fix the footer a little bit here as well. So bear with me for just a minute as we do a little housekeeping here and change where we're at. And remember, every time you click on this, view the source, take a look at the CSS, put it all together on your screen and play with it. So let's grab 15 here. I want to do that real quick and get rid of 14. Let's grab that. So now we're going to use something called the clear attribute. And we're going to do that to make sure that nothing can float to the left or the right of our footer. So our footer is going to be down below everything. So let's see what we got here. Again, no change to that. Our header, we're adding padding 10 pixels. It's one number. So that is top, right, bottom, left, all in one number. And that's going to kind of push everything into a vertical center for our header information that I can't even remember what the devil, I think it was just, this is a header in that header image. Now, the footer is where we're going to work on this time. You notice right off the bat, it says clear both, which means it won't allow any content to float on its left or on its right. Its height is going to be 75 pixels. We're going to be about as tall as whatever we're using for the bottom background. Background URL images back.jpg repeatx. Again, we've got that in horizontal format. We're going to italicize our font. It's going to be 0.75 em, so it's going to be slightly smaller than the normal text on the page. Font family is Times New Roman or serif. Again, just like the top, we're going to text align center the footer information. Padding top, we want to push the text on the footer down a little bit away from the top border. And then we're going to talk borders. So let's hit the escape on that, come back out here and check out slide set 3. Now, it doesn't look amazing yet because we don't have any content. Once we start putting stuff in the 2 columns, that header and footer are going to separate. The 25 pixels in padding is just what's pushing down from the top of this background image, which is the same one in the bottom, just so that the footer information is not in that first row in there. It's pushed down enough so that it looks better. And that's basically what CSS is all about, right? It's styling it, making it look good. So let's get back into our slide set here and let's talk about border. And once again, sizes and percentages. But notice, if you remember for assignment 4 and 5, we did a dashed border, but you can do dotted, dashed, solid, double, groove, ridge, inset, outset, and none. So if there's one paragraph you want to, not have a border around it, you can do border style : none. Let's see, border color. We've done that over and over again throughout the semester, so I'm not going to belabor that point. The other thing we can do, though, just like we did with the font family stuff earlier, is we can set any of these in one line. But border has to be in this order: width, style, color. And if you do that, you can do border exactly what we did in the assignment. So border, colon, thin, dotted, blue will give us a very small line of dots in blue around whatever our specific content is that we're applying the border to. So let's take a look at this. Again, same HTML. Notice down on pound main, padding right 15 pixels. So that's pushing column 2 away by 15 pixels. Actually, it's putting the text. Sorry, I was thinking about the last one. It's the margin. The padding there is pushing the text on the right-hand side 15 pixels in. So it's got a space, basically, for its content to be separate from column 2's content. On the right-hand side, we've got a border, which is 2 pixels and inset. Since it doesn't have a color there, it will be the default color. Margin bottom is 20 pixels, which means between whatever's on the bottom and itself, in this case, the footer's on the bottom, we'll have 20 pixels of space. Now let's go on to the next set. Column 2, same thing, margin bottom, 20 pixels. Now the footer, whoops, there it is. The footer has, let me move this out of the way real quick. That's a control for the zoom. If you'll notice, footer has a padding top of 25 pixels. What happens between a top and a bottom when you're putting the CSS boxes on the screen is the smaller one collapses. So what we're going to do basically is we're going to have 20 pixels there. I said the smaller one collapses. The larger one collapses into the smaller one. So you should have, instead of 45 pixels between the bottom of column 1 and column 2 and the top of the footer, you should only have 20. Or 25 rather. Wow. It's been a long week. Border top. So the footer, we're going to put a border on. It's going to be 3 pixels wide, double lines, and blue. Is that it for this one? Yep. So let's go back out here. I said let's go back out. There we go. And let's take a look at that. Oh, and my background image got moved. That's okay. Our footer's down there. That double border is the border on the top of the footer. The reason that our right-hand border for main stuff is so small is because main stuff has no content. I could add a few hundred breaks to fix some content, but just the whole point of this is you're building this web page not to be blank, but to fill it with text, fill it with images, fill it with the content that sells people on whatever story you're telling. So by the time we get to the end of this tonight, we will have all kinds of text in there, even if it's the fake Latin script that's out on the web places, in very many places, I should say. So let's take a look about a navigation section. Remember, we've done this before. We had the, when we were dealing with sections, we would put nav and fill in with an unordered list and all of this other stuff. We're going to do it again, but this time we're going to show you how to make it into a real navigation system. Now, what we've done here in line 14 is the first we've added to our HTML in this entire lecture and a half. Because remember, we started this back in lecture 8.5 or whatever I called it. All we're doing here is we're creating an ordered list inside of a nav section. Each list item, and I think I've got 3 or 4 links on it, appears in its as an unordered list. So we've got 3 or 4 URLs. Each one is represented by a straight bullet point. And again, you can go to W3 Schools, look for ordered list or unordered list, and find different ways to change the look of either unordered lists or ordered lists. And I think we talked about it when we were back there the first time. Now, what our CSS is going to do, body, header, and main stay the same. Column 2 is going to stay the same. Our picture, our first paragraph, our footer, all the same. That shouldn't be all the same. Oh, I know why it's all the same, because I forgot to do display. Now, what display does is it allows us to change the way something works. So a block is a paragraph, for example, is a block. It's got content. What's the next one? Padding, border, and margins. Inline, though, is the way we started learning CSS from day one. Remember, we had style equals blue that turned the background colors of our paragraph blue. Inline styles do not have the same thing that blocks do. But there's a special one that combines the two, and that's called inline block. And what that is going to do is it's going to take our ordered list and it's going to switch it to horizontal. And that's really cool. Again, the same change there, which is just the nav section. Here we got nothing again, nothing again. But anywhere we have a class of .menu that has a list item, we're going to display them in line. So let's see what that does for us. Spiders aren't supposed to come in until the fall when it starts to get cold, but for some reason I've had 3 or 4 of them this week. They're just kind of creepy. They got too many eyes or something. So this is what we've done. There's my links, and they work even though they are not looking like a regular nav section like we have before with the ordered list. But they really are. I'm going to kill that one. It's basically an opportunity for us to change the way it looks. And again, for some reason, the image is incorrect. Let's view a page source here. Oh, I think I misspelled blue leather, B-L-U leather. That's why it's not appearing. So I'll have to go back and fix that. But imagine the blue across the top. Imagine the blue across the bottom. And there is our right-hand border. And it's lengthened. The problem with doing it quite that way, though, is notice it only really lasts until the content in column 1 is done. Then we kind of lose it over here. There's other CSS rules that we can utilize to make that happen. But for now, it's good enough. I'm not expecting you to have, a commercial website that, sells everybody on your grandma's restaurant or something like that. I want to know that you can walk out of our class at the end of the summer and be able to build a basic static web page or a basic site of static web pages. We will talk about CGI scripts a little bit, but again, I'm going to blame Odin on this. Part of our problem with the spring semester was that the the workability, basically, let's use that word, of the CGI scripts was intermittent. In other words, sometimes it would seem to work, sometimes it wouldn't. And the only thing I can think of is that it was involved with the rule set for Odin. Mine would work every time. I would help a student work through his or hers. And sometimes they would work once we'd gotten them to run on my machine, and sometimes they wouldn't. So we're going to talk through some CGI. We'll see what we can do. Maybe we can have a couple in-person meetings on a Thursday night and work through them together. That may be possible. Let's go on. This one has a lot of CSS changes. So let's just walk through those. And again, same HTML we used for the last 3 or 4 slides. We've made no changes to the body, the header, the main, or column 2. Our picture, our first paragraph, and our footer are staying the same. Now, here's where we start to change things. Anywhere where I had a class of menu and a list item, I wanted to display it in line, and we did. Anywhere I have a class menu just all on its own, I want to change the list style type to none. That means the bullets that appear on an ordered or an unordered list go away. Our margin around the edges is 0 pixels. So basically we want to have no spaces in between them. Padding, when it's 2, the 7 pixels is for the top and the bottom. The left and right are 0. So there is no padding in between the buttons we've created. At least they look like buttons. And text align center is going to grab a hold of all 3 of those buttons and center it in the screen. Or in our space, which is 800 pixels or 85%. Anywhere where we have a class of menu, a list item, and remember the pseudo classes, an anchor tag that is just sitting around as a link, or an anchor tag that we've gone to and come back from. We want a white foreground color. We want kind of a blue-gray, I think is what that is, background color. Again, text align center, the padding, the text decoration is none, which means we don't have any underlines. Text transform uppercase turns everything that is lowercase into uppercase. Wherever we have at line 59 a class of menu that has a list item that includes a link, when you hover over it, it flips the colors. So instead of being white text on a blue background, this is blue text on a white background. And again, the text align and so forth is the same as the last one we talked about. Now, let's hit the escape button here and let's go here and let's take a look at it. So again, I am sorry, I have to go back and fix those, but here's the cool part. When I hover over XKCD, it flips. Now I don't have the underline that is the standard version, but anytime you see a page that does something like this, this action tends to make people click. So that's a perfectly viable way to delineate the links that you have on your page. You could put it anywhere inside of the paragraphs in here as well and just keep the same style, but point it towards a span tag instead. There's all kinds of different stuff we can do with this stuff. And it's really, really cool. I'm going to minimize that. Let's talk about the last CSS slide for this particular set of lectures. List style type values, text decorations, all of that kind of thing. Check out the other 2 slide sets, one of which is going to have The My Antonia website, that's not the one that talks heavily about positioning. Instead, look at the other one. I can't remember what I named it at this point, but that one talks about the differences in the positioning beyond just the static flow. If you're really getting into this, there are a couple of older books that I have in the syllabus on CSS and basically just some fun stuff in there with CSS that you could pick up probably relatively cheaply because, you know, I think they're 2016 now. So, you know, everybody thinks that if you're 4 years out of date in this world, nothing is of value. And that can't be the case. That's absolutely not the case. Because CSS is CSS. Unless it's actually deprecated under the rules, it's fair game for your final project, at least. So, just a little more housekeeping here at the end of the video. Please remember, I sent it out as a text message to everyone in the class, but our first exam is going to be from Tuesday to Thursday of next week. I have had, I've rewritten the exam, changed a few things for our summer class. And basically, if you can follow through the two, the test guides, help sheets, I can't even remember what the hell you call those. Anyway, I've got two of them out there. One is your standard kind of test review. The other is a short quiz I used to give in the classroom in order to have people kind of feel out how long the test would take them if they were taking it for real. Instead, since we are not meeting in person and we frankly, honestly don't have the time to pull that class or to pull the quiz in a classroom, I've just given you the key. So it's got the question and the answer with it. Some of them might not be what you do in your outside world at your job, for example, but they're the ones that are in our book. So that's the way they're based as far as that quiz is concerned. That's really about it for tonight. Just remember to keep studying, keep working on the homework, and we will talk about Perl on the lectures for next week. And we'll see where we get from there. I've got to take a couple of hours and figure out how we're going to work through the last part of the class this semester. We will have a final exam, but depending on how far we get, it may be truncated. All right, I am done with you for tonight, or today, or again, whenever you're there. I will put this up on YouTube. I've got the one for the badges processing right now. This one will have to process from Zoom, and then it will have to process on YouTube as well. So again, it may take a little while. So we will have assignment 9 today. And assignment 9 is basically the first page and the CSS of your project for the semester. Go with whatever you had in your assignment 6. And, you know, rock and roll, have fun with it. This is the case where you can do just about anything you want as long as it's not JavaScript, because we don't talk enough about JavaScript in the course. All right. Thank you, folks. I will talk to you next time. Have a great evening. Stay safe. Stay healthy.